County.
Tell by the fact that I'm talking, it's exactly 7 o'clock. Rogers has instructed me to start on time. Can everyone at the back hear me? Thank you. My name is Trent Gow. I have to look at that, just my notes to see that. I'm a member of the Owen Sound and District Chamber of Commerce and on their Advocacy Committee, and I'm privileged to be your moderator for tonight. I'd like to welcome all of you, and it's wonderful to see so many. I just wish there were more that were under 60 than perhaps are over 60, but we'll work on that. To this live broadcast. The Chamber, I think many of you know, represents nearly 400 local businesses that provide a lot of the jobs and part of the economy in this area, Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. But there obviously are lots of other contributors in agriculture and education and other areas as well. One of the most important things we believe is exercising your right to vote. It's important that if you have political views, if you care about this country, that you vote. So that's our purpose tonight, to help you to vote in an informed way. I'd like to now just quickly review the format of this meeting tonight. In the first hour, the Chamber will ask our questions, and starting at 8 o'clock, audience questions will be put to the candidates. Anyone in the audience, some of you may already have, is invited to write a question. And as moderator, response for that person, or a 1-minute response if it goes to all of the 6 candidates. And my criteria are real easy in terms of the questions. It will be random, but I have to be able to read it. It has to be relevant. The question needs to be clear, and if there's duplication, then obviously that will mean the second time I get the same question, I won't ask it. But I want to emphasize there's no pre-selection. This is a random selection so that we're not determining who is asking questions. I think that's really important. So in order for us to get things going and keep them moving fairly and quickly, there are time limits. 2 minutes for opening statements, 2 minutes if a question is asked of all candidates. It says 2 minutes, but I think it's 1 minute if the questions are asked of all candidates, 2 minutes if a question is asked of only one candidate. And at the end of the meeting, each candidate will have 1 minute to wrap up, and we'll do that in reverse order to opening statement. I know I jumbled that, but is that clear to the candidates? Thank you. We have a timekeeper who will raise a sign signaling that the candidate has 30 seconds to complete their response, and then a signal for them to stop as their time runs out. We very much appreciate and are indebted to the candidates for being here tonight, for the sacrifices they are willing to make on just this one of many days in the campaign. Each of them deserves our respect, and please try to respond in a nonpartisan way in this room and respect each of the people and their views and the fact that they are providing so much of their own personal volunteer activity and time to this precious responsibility that they've taken on. So earlier this evening, not very long ago, we drew lots to see who would go first. Candidates are seated in the way that their opening statements will be. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask Danielle Valaquette from the Green Party to start for 2 minutes, please. Oh, is it? I'm sorry, I screwed up already. Mr. Little.
Yes. Well, first I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here tonight, and to thank the Chamber for hosting this event. I personally can think of about 1 million things I'd rather be doing than be here, But here we go. This would be an ideal time to explain what libertarianism is. But that's not how I'm going to start. First, I'm going to start with what it isn't. It is not anarchy. It is not a violent purge, no matter how many people seem to think that it is. It is not globalism. It is not nationalism. It is not left-wing. It is not right-wing. So what is it then? It's people coming together to work together with one another and in nature to find real, free market, non-partisan solutions to our common problems. These problems include loss of rural mail service, gun restrictions and fraudulent buyback programs, and excuse me. And the Libertarian Party of Canada is continuing to work for the 1%. The 1% of people who know that the government is a colossus of failure and needs to be severely limited. The 1% of people that know that taxation is theft, fraud, and armed extortion all rolled into one. The 1% of people who know that the Indian Act is just racist slavery dressed up in 21st century language. The 1% of people that can no longer support foreign intervention that's leading to a never-ending cycle of war, poverty, and violence. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Dan Little from the Libertarian Party. I'd now like to ask Mr. Alex Ruff from the Conservative Party of Canada.
So first off, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here tonight and the organizers for putting on this spectacular event and getting a chance for all of us to share our respective party platforms. So I grew up on a small farm in Tara, Ontario, went to high school in Chesley, graduated from the Royal Military College with an honors space science degree. I then have spent the last 25 years in the military. I just retired recently as a colonel. I got over 20 years working at all levels of government. 6 operational deployments, including the ice storm here in eastern Ontario and western Quebec in 1998, 2 tours in Bosnia, 2 in Afghanistan, including a combat mission, and just most recently I just came back from Iraq working with the ministerial liaison team there. My priorities and concerns, along with that of the Conservative Party of Canada, are focused on us living within our means and making life more affordable for you. Some key announcements to date that we already announced are the universal tax cut, specifically focused on the lower income tax bracket, removing GST off your home heating bill, helping young parents and seniors via tax credits, and making housing more affordable and attainable, standing up for rural Canada, putting forth a real plan for the environment that's focused on green technology and not taxes, supporting small business by reducing the amount of legislation and regulations. And as well, one of the ways we're going to balance this is by cutting costs, corporate welfare subsidies to the tune of $1.5 billion. Personally, seniors, farmers, small business, responsible fiscal management, including balanced budgets, and standing up for our military and veterans are dear to my heart. I believe my proven track record of trusted, dedicated service will do me well to be your voice in Ottawa. I've been serving Canada my whole adult life, and I hope to continue that record. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Michael Denton. Nope. I'm sorry. Bill Townsend. You don't look anything like Michael Denton.
Not at all. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for coming. 2 minutes is not much time for an introduction, so I will do what I can. I'm Bill Townsend, your candidate for the People's Party of Canada. We are the newest and fastest growing party in Canadian history. The PPC is the only party that will provide a principled and rational alternative to the repeated empty words, spin doctoring, failed promises that we have all, sadly, come to expect. We will pull out of the Paris Accord. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. It is simply a globalist program designed to redistribute wealth at the discretion of unelected UN bureaucrats. Second, the goals are not attainable without destroying the economy of our country. The oil executives who created the UNEP and the UNFCCC want you to care enough about climate change that you will be willing to go along with their global agenda. Follow the money. We will cancel the carbon tax, period. We will not repackage it with a new name like some others in order to appear to have a different platform. Again, follow the money. We will finally respect our veterans and make sure that they are properly looked after for the first time in almost 14 years. Why were they abandoned? Follow the money. We will end corporate welfare, period. Again, why was it started in the first place? Follow the money. Lastly, we have a bold commitment to scrapping the Indian Act. It will be a big job, but the plan is to restore dignity and prosperity to all First Nations people. We must finally forge a fair and respectful relationship as equal partners. Now, I wish I had time for more, but that's 2 minutes. Please visit Bruce-Grey-Owen ppc.ca. There's a link on a card out in the hallway there, and you can pick that up. And let me just finish by saying the PPC will put Canada first based on freedom, responsibility, fairness, and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Now, I think I introduced you already, but Michael Denton of the Liberal Party of Canada.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. Thanks to the Owen Sound Chamber of Commerce for hosting us. For months now, I've been speaking with people across our riding about the issues that concern you in this campaign. I've knocked on thousands of doors. And funnily enough, not a single person I've spoken with, not one, has said that what they really want to hear is more insults flying back and forth between the camps. People want to know who we are and what we're going to do if elected. My father was a teacher, my mom a nurse, my grandparents were farmers. And the concerns you have, healthcare, climate, education, jobs, housing, a decent pension, are the same ones I have. These are the big challenges I hear about at the door time and time again. Making sure residents and businesses of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound have access to reliable, high-speed internet. How to do a better job of retraining workers in a fast-changing economy where too many manufacturing jobs are moving offshore. Helping secure the future of workers by improving public transportation and housing for families. And above all, climate change. Our environmental record is the strongest of any Canadian government in this country's history. We need to build on that. I've spent time on the front lines of these debates, working on NAFTA in the Prime Minister's office. I know how to get things done in Ottawa. I've also spent years getting to know our community as a homeowner, a father, and editor of the Sun-Times. I was co-founder of the Owen Sound Hub. I've taught hundreds of kids at Foot Ocean Dojo in Owen Sound over the years. And because of that experience, I know very well that rural and small-town Ontarians must fight to have our voices heard. I will be that voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Stephen from the NDP.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event tonight and thank all of you for coming. I'd also like to say hi to my Aaron Elderslie band of Ice Dogs who are on the ice right now without me, working hard, getting ready for Silver Stick. And I'd also like to say solidarity to my QP siblings today. I know they're going through a rough time, and so I just wanted to give them a little shout out. It's an honor to be here before you today with my colleagues in promoting democracy in our country and giving you the opportunity to choose from our policies and ideas. How would you like our Canada to look? I would first like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Saugeen First Nation on whose traditional lands we live. It is with great pride that I have been chosen by the New Democratic Party to represent them in this election and carry the torch of decency and social economic justice to make life much better in Canada for everyone. We can expand Medicare so people are covered from head to toe, including pharmacare that covers everyone. No longer should people have to ration their prescription to make ends meet while endangering their lives. No longer should we have literally to choose between wellness and illness because of expensive drugs and a less than adequate income. A pharmacare approach has been tested throughout the world quite successfully, so let's do it. We can lower your internet and cell phone bills and make childcare more affordable for every family. We can save Canadians $250 a year with our program. Canadians bear the burden of the most expensive internet and cell phone fees anywhere. We can fight the climate crisis, defend our land, air, and water, and create 300,000 clean energy jobs. The environment and the climate crisis is incredibly important to me, and I refuse to sit idly and watch the world decay and slowly die. Thank you.
Danielle Valaquette, I started with you wrongly. Now I start with you rightly.
Perfect. Thank
Green
you.
Party of Canada.
Thank you, Trent. Good evening. I'm Danielle Valaquette of the Green Party, and I'd like to thank the Owen Sound Chamber for organizing tonight, as well as Trent for moderating, and of course, all of you for coming out this evening. Tonight, for now anyway, I will spare you the scientific details. Besides, you know them already. But it is science that tells us that we're in a climate mess. And as tonight's meeting unfolds, I ask you to keep in mind 3 things that we must and we can do. First, we must repair the damage that we've done to our soil, our water, and our air. Secondly, we must ensure a just transition away from fossil fuels for everyone. We cannot pit our economy against our environment. And thirdly, perhaps most importantly, we must act now. And I suggest another green government action that must pervade all other measures: the building of partnerships across all sectors of our society. We need all hands on deck. I'm proud to be green. Our platform is fully costed because the Green Party is committed to responsible fiscal policy, and that starts with transparency. We have identified a plan to address the climate crisis with the boldest climate action plan out there. It's called Mission Possible. Canadians living in rural areas are part of the Green Party's overall strategy to strengthen our communities and bring people together. Our platform focuses on connecting people in rural communities with transit, internet, and political collaboration. Old-line political parties are hemmed in by their past habits and their ways of seeing the world. These parties have decades of seeing politics in left-wing, right-wing terms. That's not how the Green Party sees things. We take ideas that will work from anywhere on the political spectrum. The Green Party sums it up in...
Thank you. We're now going to turn to the Chamber's questions for the next 40 minutes or so before we turn to the audience questions. I'm going to start with Mr. Little in terms of this first round of questions, and the subject is immigration. There are 3 classes of immigrants in Canada. There's economic class, which is the one that gets the most focus. Refugees and family relocation are the other 2. So our focus has been on the productive record that Canada has had with respect to economic immigrants, but I'd like to address the other 2 with each candidate. What support programs or other initiatives does your party propose so that Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound is well positioned to benefit from the economic, social, and cultural contributions of refugees and family class immigrants?
Right.
Thank you. 2 minutes.
Well, the libertarian policy on immigration is quite simply to not really have a defined policy on immigration, because every other party has a cap on immigration at some level. The NDP and the Greens are the most permissive at 1% of population, and then it decreases from there. Our policy on all class of immigration, regardless of economic or family or refugee, is to open the borders as far as the free markets and the individual will allow. So anyone can immigrate to Canada as a refugee or as a family reunification if they're sponsored. If someone's willing to put up collateral to sponsor them to bring them here, then they deserve to be here. Economic immigration is best left in the hands of the free markets because that is where they'll be going to work. So it doesn't make any sense for Ottawa to have burdensome regulation to restrict the free market's ability to generate revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ruff?
Yeah, so our policy from a conservative standpoint is not to restrict anything. I actually believe our current immigration system has been working for decades, and it's been working quite well if we follow the rules. Part of the challenges is right now we've been bringing in or allowing in a lot of refugees across the U.S. border, and we've signed a third safe country agreement with the U.S. that shouldn't allow those refugees to come into Canada. We need immigration. Nobody doubts that. The Conservative Party is 100% behind it because we need it for our economic development. Even locally here, I've talked to a lot of local farmers that utilize transient workers as well, and other people that they need that help. The issue is when people are jumping the line, and I've talked to immigrants that have come here in the last 15 or 20 years, whether they're economic or family, and they're actually quite disappointed when there's people being allowed in before the normal process and jumping that queue. But bottom line, we believe our numbers should be based upon the requirements that, as Dan even suggested, the market drives, and it can be different across this great country, right? What we need here in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound may be different on what we need in Halifax versus British Columbia versus Alberta. So bottom line is, the demand will determine how many refugees, immigrants we need here in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, so the People's Party of Canada is pro-immigration. And when we say that, we want to have a situation so that immigrants that come to Canada will be successful. Right now, in absolute numbers, not per capita, in absolute numbers, Canada takes in more refugees than any other developed Western nation. And there's costs associated with that. From what I understand, many of the people who are crossing the border, as Alex made reference to, 40% of them are being sent back again. That doesn't do them any good. It doesn't do us any good. So what we would like to do is focus on economic migrants. We would like to focus specifically on economic migrants, reduce the number of refugee claimants that we have so that we can make sure that the immigrants that we welcome to the country are going to have a place to go and a place to grow and are going to be able to be successful when they come to Canada. We would like to use the point system that we used decades ago. Alex said that the immigration system has been successful for the past several decades, but it has changed in the last 5 to 10 years. We, for some reason, are not really sticking to the rules that we used to use, the point system and that sort of thing. So that's really the position of the People's Party of Canada. We're pro-immigration, and we want to ensure that the people that are welcomed into Canada are given a chance to be successful when they get here. Thank you.
Michael?
If the People's Party of Canada is pro-immigration, somebody appears to have forgotten to tell the leader, Maxime Bernier, because his Twitter feed is all about reducing immigration and not having increases in immigration to keep pace with economic growth. We need immigrants in this country. The reality is that we are all immigrants here except for the Indigenous people. We are immigrants, or we are the children of immigrants. My dad was an immigrant. My mom was the fourth generation of Irish immigrants to the Irish bloc. And that is how this country was built. So it's I think, really important not to confuse immigration with refugee policy. Refugee policy is determined by essentially by compassion and by our law. We're a country that has the rule of law. Whenever somebody sets foot across the Canadian border, the law requires that their claim be assessed. And that is what is happening right now. The number of those migrants, irregular migrants who are coming across the border, by the way, has declined. It's dropped in half in the last year because of measures taken by the Canadian government to make sure that people at the source locations of those flows understand that there's no free pass to get into Canada. If you come in, you're assessed, it's determined whether you're a refugee or an economic migrant, and if you're an economic migrant, you're sent back to the country of origin, whether it's the US or any other country. And that's the way the system should work. So refugee policy is one thing, immigration policy is another. In terms of our immigration policy, I would like to see us increase the numbers of immigrants who come into Canada and are directed and encouraged to come settle in Grey Bruce, because we need more people here to do the jobs that need doing. We have a labor shortage, and it is a very serious issue for local business.
Thank you. Chris?
I agree with what Michael just said, but there's a couple of things I'd like to touch on that hasn't been said yet. When we welcome immigrants into our country to work for us, we got to make sure that they're treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. That is of the utmost importance. We also need to make sure that they are ensured to have a path to permanent residence so that doesn't hang over their heads while they're here. And we need to get rid of the backlogs in the system so that it happens faster and cut some of the red tape. Thank you.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you. So we absolutely need immigration within Canada, in particular in Grey Bruce. Currently, our unemployment percentage is under 5%. That means that there are people out there that are looking for employees and they cannot hire them. So we absolutely need to bring people into Canada. One of the things that the Green Party will do is that they will work with associations to make sure that when somebody comes over and they've had education in a different country, that we can work with those people, work with the association, and have them be able to work under their profession within Canada. That means when we bring over doctors, when we bring over nurses, we can work with the associations so that they can be working within their field within Canada and within Grey Bruce. One of the other things that the Green Party, a strong part of our platform, is transportation. When newcomers come to Grey Bruce, one of the biggest obstacles that they have is transportation. The Green Party will work to ensure that there is rural transportation within Grey Bruce so that people can get where they need to go. Another thing that the Green Party will do is that we will work with the community, with newcomers, to ensure that they are getting the language training that they need. That means in both English and French. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, for the second question, I'm going to start with Alex. I'm going to try to, so that the same person doesn't end up having to answer first all the time. I think it's an onus or extra responsibility. So I'm going to start with Alex, and the subject is rural internet. In our view, the Chamber's view, rural Grey Bruce is at a serious economic disadvantage resulting from accessibility to high-speed internet. We just don't have it. The long delays, red tape, and lack of a coherent approach between all orders of government has crippled rural economic growth. And it really deprives us of the opportunities that high-speed internet can offer. What would you, each of you, do to ensure that rural Grey Bruce is no longer economically and competitively disadvantaged waiting for high-speed internet?
Yeah, so this is a concern that we're hearing at a lot of the doors, and I think all the candidates will agree there. So we need rural broadband internet in our area for a number of reasons. Let's look at farmers first and foremost. They need it. A lot of the technology is changing. The equipment's not the way it once was. I've been out to a couple of the robotic dairy farms, and I actually kind of told them, you shouldn't let me in here, because the amount of work has definitely changed, and it's not what I grew up seeing and experiencing. Small business needs internet. One of the big challenges we have in our area, especially here in Owen Sound, is we're losing some of our manufacturing. So we need to come up with bright ideas and innovation to get and attract companies. Quality of life is very important, especially with our younger people. They want to work from home. Well, if you can't connect, if you can't communicate, and you don't have that rural broadband capability, it's going to be tough to attract businesses and people to want to reside here and grow their business. It was mentioned in the question. This isn't something that's a federal responsibility and federal responsibility alone. This requires collaborative work at all three levels of government and with private industry. The SWIFT program that the current provincial government's doing, they've just put, I think, $315 million into moving this initiative forward so that rural broadband is something that comes right across this province, but specifically targeted towards southwestern Ontario. Thank you.
Please.
All right, so the position of the People's Party of Canada for tackling this particular problem, and the problem was identified in the question itself, at least partially, in that part of the difficulty is the red tape that exists. And I'm going to tell a little story about when I lived outside of town and I needed to get internet access. And I had really two choices. I could go with dial-up from Bell, or I could use ExploreNet, which is predominantly delivered via satellite, but they also do sometimes use the LTE network. But it's quite expensive, and the satellite version is very slow because you can get download speeds that are okay, but the upload speed is terrible because that has to happen over dial-up as well. So I went with a company out of Holstein called ATEL. And they're an independent internet service provider using their own Wi-Fi network that they have basically built up using the grain legs on local farms. And it was extremely reliable. It was very good. But the red tape is part of the problem because the big three are the ones who get access to all of the licensing for the infrastructure. Small companies are not able to develop and grow. So our mission is to reduce the red tape, cut down the regulations by basically rewriting the regulations with the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission so that independent companies will be able to grow it. We do not need the Canadian government to promise to be everyone's internet service provider. I certainly don't want the government as my ISP. Thank you.
Michael?
Well, I share the frustration of those who are upset that it's taking so long for us to get high speed in our area. We've been having meetings about this for at least a decade. The SWIFT program was officially incorporated in 2015, and here we are 4 years later, and we're still working on this, which is why I was very pleased that when the Prime Minister visited Owen Sound a few weeks ago, this was the topic that was the order of the day. He met with local businesses, discussed the issue, and reiterated the government's commitment to dealing with this and getting solutions in a practical and effective and timely way. So the investment in the 2019 budget was significant. It was $1.7 billion to be in the Connect to Innovate program. And the goal there is very specific. It's 95% access to 50 megabyte download and 10 megabyte upload speeds by 2026. And we're tracking for 90% by 2021. And you might say, well, okay, where's the beef? Where's the action here? There actually is progress being made here finally. Telesat is working on a project to use low Earth orbit satellites to bring high-speed internet to this area. And I know this because I happened to knock on a fellow's door who works for Telesat and is working on this project, and they're talking about hiring in Hanover to bring it about. Is it happening quickly enough? No. And does it need a big push from the local MP and all local governments? Absolutely it does.
Thank you, Chris.
Rural internet is something that's really important for every business owner, every community, every agricultural business. It is something that is important and critical that we get here as quickly as we can, and we're committed to doing that. But we also want to address the economics of it. You also need cell phone service that's reliable and affordable. And we are working on putting into place a plan that lowers cell phone costs so everybody has a data plan that they can afford so they can afford access to cell phones and internet. Thank you.
Danielle?
Anybody who's ever heard me speak municipally knows how near and dear this is to my heart. The digital divide in Canada speaks to the social inequalities within our country. An increase in rural broadband means a stronger economy and more options for everyone, including our youth. So right now, broadband is too slow and too slow. First off, the money that the Liberals are giving are inadequate for all of Canada. The rural areas in Southwest Ontario alone have at least a $2.5 billion infrastructure deficit. This is according to SWIFT. Secondly, this idea of 50-10 is basically the new dial-up. Why should rural areas not be equal to our urban peers? Toronto, you can get 1 gig up and 1 gig down for about $100 a month. Imagine if we could have that here, the home-based businesses, our education opportunities, as well as the healthcare innovations that we would see. And by working from home, we would obviously reduce our greenhouse gases because we wouldn't be driving. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going down to the other end. Dan?
Well, ever since they declared internet to be an essential service, my rates went up twice. So I'd like to know what's really going on here. The simplest solution is oftentimes the most correct. Just get rid of the CRTC. It's outlived its usefulness as a regulatory agency. It was useful back in the 50s when radio was the only method of communication, but the times have changed and the government needs to get out of its own way. If they would just abolish that predatory monopoly, more companies would be able to start up and the free markets would be able to expand and meet our rural internet needs, cell phones included. I mean, in 2013, Verizon tried to come up north and set up shop, but they were lobbied into the dirt by the big three. So if we get rid of the protectionism, the free markets take over. Thank you.
Thank you. If this doesn't get too complicated for me, I'm now going to start my next question with Bill Townsend from the People's Party of Canada. But first, you have to know what it is. What would your party do to make affordable, subsidized if necessary, accessible rental housing and home ownership more affordable and available for low-income seniors and the millennial generation in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound?
Well, the first thing that the People's Party of Canada wants to do is restructure the tax system. We want to raise the basic personal exemption to $15,000. We announced that about 4 months ago, and it's interesting because the Conservative Party has now started to copy that, among a few other things that we have rolled out as well. And we want to have two tax rates. We want to have the first tax rate at $15,000, the second at $25,000. That won't kick in until you earn $100,000 a year. So your first $15,000 will be tax-free. And we want to eliminate the capital gains tax altogether. It's through a coherent plan of economic stimulus and reducing taxation that people will be able to afford their housing, and the cost of housing will be brought down. It's difficult for the federal government to be able to promise to provide, say, subsidized housing for people, because over the last 4 years, the debt per capita in Canada has gone up more than any other administration in our history, except for two. And any money that we spend now is going to be a tax tomorrow. So we have to be careful how we do it. What we need to do is fix this broken system so that people will be able to afford to live without government interference. Thank you.
Please.
Actually, the relationship between the size of our debt and the size of our economy is the healthiest it's been in the past 50 years. The question of housing is one that we hear about all the time at the door and all over the riding. I'm happy that the Liberal government is moving on this issue and taking it very, very seriously by expanding the first-time homebuyers program, which is offering up to 10% down for new builds, a home retrofit program, which is tied to our climate plan, with up to $40,000 in interest-free loans for people who'd like to retrofit their houses and make them more fuel efficient and economical and less carbon intensive. A measure that reduces foreign speculation to keep the price of houses lower than it otherwise would go if foreign speculators were allowed to buy into the market. A national housing strategy that is seeing us build new homes, 140,000 new homes to be specific by 2028, and the Canada Housing Benefit, which is designed to help specifically people who are renting with the cost of rent. But the one thing I would add about this is that with all of this money that is flowing on the housing front, we need more of that money to come here. We need some of these federal dollars that are currently going to the GTA and down east and to other places to come to Central Ontario. And that hasn't happened anywhere near enough over the past 15 years. We need more federal benefits in our riding.
Thank you, Michael. Chris?
Housing is definitely a vital issue coming up in this election. There's nothing more important than having a place to live, a place that you can afford, and that fits your needs, especially for younger families and seniors. So what we've committed to do is to build 500,000 quality, affordable homes across this country. We want to have immediate relief for renters that need help now with a rental benefit up to $5,000. We want to reintroduce the 30-year mortgage and doubling the first-time homeowners buyer tax credit to $1,500. And we as well want foreign buyers tax to crack down on the speculation that drives up the prices. This is also crucial to make sure that we don't have people living on the streets. So we also need to make sure there's supports to help and assist people when they're having trouble finding housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Danielle?
So affordability is critical. Unfortunately, my liberal counterpoint will tell you that the first-time home buyer grant, they're going to increase that, and the conservatives are going to change the stress test. But unfortunately, all that is going to do is have people pay more money for a longer time. After decades of encouraging home ownership, we have had an increase in federal supports for co-ops, rental housing, social housing, and supportive housing. Now what we need is a national affordable housing so that we decrease the amount of homelessness and housing insecurity within our community. The Liberal National Housing Strategy is the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough. It rolls out over 15 years, but we need that now. The Green Party of Canada will provide direct investment and strengthen the Liberals' National Housing Strategy to meet the needs of affordable housing that are unique to every province. We will increase with 25,000 new homes and 15,000 rehabilitated homes annually for the next 10 years. The Green Party Canada will also change tax policies. We will restore tax incentives for building purpose-built rental housing. And I will note that this is a Liberal promise that was not kept in 2015. The Green Party Canada will support lending and granting programs, increasing the national housing co-investment by $750 million for new builds.
Well, housing affordability can only possibly come from the free markets. Government interference and regulation always drives the prices up. So we need to immediately abolish any and all subsidies as they apply to housing. We need to end the first-time homebuyers credit and certainly not expand it. Evan Siddall, the head of the CMHC, is opposed to the expansion since it will lead to an even bigger bubble than what we have now. We need to abolish rent controls. This has been proven in Toronto to actually lower rental prices and spur the creation of more rental units. And the capital gains tax absolutely must go because prospective home sellers, if they own multiple homes, all they do is they calculate the taxes owed and then tack it onto the asking price. So whoever buys the house ends up paying more than what it's actually worth in the free market. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, so again, this is an issue you hear at the door a lot in our riding. So what the Conservative Party is proposing, first and foremost, is to knock down all the regulatory barriers. And this needs to be done through, again, collaborative work at all levels of government, but that's the start because it's holding up the ability to actually produce or get more homes built. As well, we got to fix the current first-time home buyers stress test, as alluded to, so that more people can qualify. And make remove the necessary tests for renewal. I actually talked to an individual, a family down in the Chatsworth area, and they actually they have roughly a $600,000 home, but they're seniors. They owe only about $60,000, and yet they can't get a renewal under the current stress test, which doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, and they've never missed a payment. We're going to expand the amortization up to 30 years, which will allow more people to make lower payments and get by. And we're going to actually make surplus federal real estate available so you can get more houses built across this great country. As the current government's proposal with their first-time home buyers, homeowners incentive, the problem with that is you actually got to give up a percentage of your any capital gains you make to the government. So, all right, my house has now gone up $10,000. I go to sell it, and I actually got to give Ben back a percentage of it. And I don't want the government owning any of my personal property. For renters and in general to make housing more affordable, right, we're proposing our universal tax cut, as I mentioned earlier, which is targeted towards the lower income people. We get rid of GST off your home heating bill. And as well as one of the actual Canadians that was talking to Andrew Scheer last night on the National, the renters are looking for even that 30-year amortization, because right now they're just wasting money. If they're renting, they need to be able to get into the real estate market. Thanks.
Well timed. The next question, I guess I'll be starting with Michael Denton from the Liberal Party, and it's concerning the harbour. I don't know how much this has been talked about. It used to be talked about a couple of years ago, but the basic point is the remediation and the revitalization of the Owen Sound Harbour seems to be on the back burner right now. In large part, this may be because the federal government, perhaps this one and the previous certainly, so we're not pointing fingers at any party, they own the harbour, but they haven't been prepared to clean it up as such. They want to transfer it, I believe, but that requires finding a partner, the province, the municipality, or a First Nation to assume ownership, and that requires some form of monies to be transferred. What leadership will you bring to ensure that Owen Sound Harbour is cleaned up and once again, and is a source of economic prosperity and enjoyment?
The harbor was last dredged in 1986, and the negotiations to redredge began in 2004. So this tells us how long running this has been. There have been negotiations on and off for years. The most recent one ended in the spring of this year in really a stalemate, and those negotiations were held behind closed doors. So residents of this area don't have any idea really what the impasse was that led to the stalemate. What we know is that the harbor is coated. The bottom of the harbor is coated with toxic sludge, and to remove it is going to be extremely tricky, if not impossible, without very expensive processes, engineering processes, some of which have been tested in other harbors around the world, but which need to be explored, and that work hasn't happened. So what I would do is propose that we sit down. All the levels of government in the area sit down, including the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which must be consulted, and figure out in public what the options are for the harbor. Should it be a pleasure harbor? Should it be capped the way Hamilton Harbor was? Should it be dredged the way Sydney Harbor was, using a system of booms to make sure that the toxic sludge on the bottom of the harbor doesn't get out into the bay? And cost out all these options. And once that work is done, then people can make an intelligent assessment of which way to go. Until that work is done, we're all just flying blind. And this is a big potential problem because the water's high right now. It's not always going to be high. Eventually, the Chichimon is not going to be able to make it in there, and Parrish and Heinbeck are going to be in a position of wanting to move away. So we do need to deal with this urgently.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, being a non-resident of Owen Sound, I live in Chesley, as many of you probably know. I was unaware of the harbor problem, so I'm not going to sit here and give you a bunch of BS on the subject. What I am going to say is simply this. It sounds like something where all levels of government and the people of Owen Sound need to come together in a room and figure out a solution. So collaboration is always the best way to solve things, and negotiation. So if that is something that is important to the area, I for sure would take it forward to my government and make sure that they address it.
Thank you. Danielle?
So this is a long-standing problem within Owen Sound, and the Son has been consulted on this. So the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation does not want the harbor dredged, and I stand with them on this. There are toxins within the harbor that could potentially be stirred up and become part of the river and part of the ecosystem, and I am not willing to take that risk with our harbor.
Thank you. Dan?
Well, I'm in a unique opportunity here in that I actually actively work in the shipping sector. So the state of the Owen Sound Harbor is nothing new to me. In fact, every summer there's a bad joke that goes around all the grain boats when you ask them where they're going and they say Owen Sound because they can only take in a half a load of cargo, otherwise they run aground in the shallow water. So the solution is to dredge the harbor. But if the government's not willing to do it, then the government should not be allowed to own the harbor. It should be sold to private enterprise who will take it upon themselves to get the dredging work done. In fact, the company I work for has lots of dredge vessels, and I'm sure we'd love the contract. And by selling it to private enterprise, I can think of at least one player offhand, that'd be P&H, as they're the main users of the grain facility at the harbor. So I'm sure if they were to own it and own the entire supply chain, it would benefit them most of all, and benefit us because we wouldn't have this massive white elephant hanging over our heads any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so I mean, Dan likely is the expert here amongst us, at least understanding the challenges with the harbor. But I'm going to agree with Michael, which doesn't happen every day. It is all about bringing all the stakeholders to the table and understanding the problem, getting the facts. It needs to be done in a transparent, accountable manner so that a proper assessment can be made and we can determine what is the best option. The best option may be, as Dan says, sell it to private industry. The best option may be federal funding to make it happen, but it is an important lifeline to our local economy. That being said, the question was asking, what leadership would I bring to solving this? Well, I think I actually got a proven track record. I've been all over this great country of ours and across the globe working with multiple different cultures, multiple different allies, multiple different organizations, and bringing everybody to the table and finding those common goals and aims that you can actually solve a problem. One of my last jobs in Ottawa, I had to bring 47 different government departments and agencies together. And one of the messages that, when you're sitting around with a bunch of directors and director generals, they're like, oh, we really don't know if we want to work on this. And it was a public safety event, emergency management. And it was like my assistant deputy minister might look bad. And I made them all stick up their hand. How many here are not a public servant? No hands came up. I said, don't worry about making your boss look good. Let's do what's right for Canadians. And actually, we got 200 training objectives done, and we actually helped fix a bunch of things. So, and I just came out of Iraq, and I'm pretty sure trying to get all the people sitting down around the table here to solve the problems a lot easier than some of the challenges I had dealing with the Iraqi government. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, so this has been a problem for decades now, and it hasn't been properly addressed by the government. They have done some investigations, some studies. I was doing some reading about it and taking a look at some of the dredging that was done in BC, and there's some very strong similarities between the two situations. Ultimately, the harbor is owned by Transport Canada. They wanted, at least it appears, they wanted to unload it on the municipality so that they wouldn't have to deal with it. But of course, as it stands right now, it's a huge liability. I agree with Dan that it has to be dredged. And that means that as the party principally responsible for it, the federal government has to take the lead. Yes, the other levels have to get together, the province, the municipality, and the First Nations people, but ultimately, it's the responsibility of the federal government. And that means it's the responsibility of the Member of Parliament for this riding to push this issue through. It's been decades, and next to nothing has been done. And you can't afford to leave it any longer. It has to be made usable. And I put some thought into this, and I would very much enjoy taking on the challenge and trying to push the federal government to take responsibility for something and stop trying to pass it off on the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think at this point we're going to go to audience questions. Oh, okay. Thank you. I do what I'm told. I'm going to ask a question. Maybe I could ask, if this isn't too challenging, for a minute and a half for this question rather than 2. Is that fair? And it's going to be on the carbon tax, something you may have heard about. Some economists think that if a carbon tax on gasoline at the pump is to be a meaningful part of the solution in addressing the climate crisis or a climate emergency, it must be increased significantly, perhaps as much as, and I say perhaps, as much as $1 per liter. And that should be done quickly if that tax is to be effective. What steps would your party take, and how quickly, to make the carbon tax on gasoline at the pump more effective? Or what other policies or taxes to combat the climate crisis would you implement instead? And I'm going to start with Chris.
Well, I'm sure by now everybody here has heard about the carbon tax and the pros and the cons, and it's been discussed completely to death. But the NDP, their stance is pretty basic. Keep the carbon tax in place, do what we need to do to increase it and make it more feasible. But the one thing that needs to happen is we need to hit the big polluters more. The big polluters are not being hit enough. It's time for them to pay their fair share on the carbon tax and hold them more accountable, more than us. It needs to happen immediately. The big polluters are a big part of the problem, so let's go after them and then address the smaller areas of gasoline and stuff.
So the carbon tax is just, sorry, Trent. The carbon tax is just a tool that economists have recommended to help us reduce CO2 emissions. So the Green Party of Canada was the first to advocate for a carbon fee and dividend system, and this is an approach that ensures that real costs of wasting energy and resources are accounted for. The Green Party of Canada believes that a carbon fee is for all producers of fossil fuels. Unfortunately, the Liberal plan taxes the big polluters according to how they compare to their industry peers in terms of efficiency, meaning they just need to be as the best of the bad. The Liberal plan falls short of reaching the targets established by Harper's government and is nowhere near close to what is required to meet the Paris agreements. Net zero by 2050 is not going to happen under the Liberal plan. So there's other things that we need to do other than a carbon tax. We need to stop pipelines, we need to discontinue fracking, and we need to green our grid. That means we need to remove fossil fuels from our grid and connect it from east to west, as opposed to giving power south of us to the United States.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, the carbon tax needs to be abolished immediately. It's nothing more than theft and extortion, with a little bit of fraud sprinkled in. And the best way to protect our environment is with real free market solutions, strengthening private property rights, letting people sue anyone that infringes on their right to a healthy, clean, and safe environment. So that's when Montreal pumps raw sewage into the water, they get sued, and so on and so forth. But really, private industry is the only way to help the environment anyway. When you get private companies developing carbon capture technology, that's what's really going to pull the CO2 out of the atmosphere, not this fraudulent tax scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec.
So yeah, the carbon tax has to go. It's not working, right? It's just making life more expensive for everybody, everyday groceries, heating, and gasoline, and it's not actually doing anything. Since 2015, we've got farther away from our from our Paris Accord agreements. We were 44 megatons away in 2015, 66 megatons away in 2016 was 44, 2017 66, and 2018 we're over 100 megatons away from our agreements. What's the Conservative Party going to do? Well, we're saying green technology, not taxes. Let's get greener and cleaner, and as well, let's take the fight global. Right now, our proposal will have those penalties kick in where industry must put their money into green technology that can be taken global at 40 kilotons over, not 50 kilotons under the current Liberal plan. We're going to introduce a green home tax credit. I think the reduction alone with your houses can be upwards of 75 megatons of greenhouse gas reduction that we could do across the country. And as well, the last thing I'd actually promote here locally that we need to worry about is just promoting our local conservation areas, our biosphere groups, our local initiatives to actually standardize recycling and do things that will help the environment at a local level. Thank you.
All right, here's the position of the People's Party of Canada on the carbon tax. It has to go. And it has to go in all of its instantiations. It can't be a cap and trade system. You can't sit here and say, we're going to apply a carbon tax, but just to the big polluters, because ultimately they are going to pass those costs on to you, and they are going to be destructive to the Canadian economy. To meet the Paris Accord, even Elizabeth May says the carbon tax would have to be $300 a ton. We cannot afford to do that. But this is not just about economics. We have to look at it and say, why should we do that? Canada produces, it depends on who you ask, anywhere between 1.4 and 1.6% of the worldwide CO2. We could eliminate all of it tomorrow, assuming you don't want to heat your house in the winter, and you would have done nothing to have an impact on these global emissions. It is simply a useless pursuit. The People's Party of Canada wants to cancel the carbon tax, withdraw from the Paris Accord, and concentrate on clean rivers, clean lakes, clean air, and energy efficiency for those purposes in and of themselves, not to meet the goals of some globalist agenda that was in fact created by the very oil companies that everybody seems to be blaming as the big monster. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I don't quite follow how pricing carbon fits into any globalist agenda, but maybe I'll understand sometime. 3,000 economists around the world have said that carbon pricing is the only way to reduce emissions. And that is because it's a free market model, essentially. It's a conservative idea. That, the idea of pricing carbon creates consumer incentive to make different decisions in the marketplace. And that's why it works. That's why it has worked in BC. It's why it's worked in the UK. It's why it's worked in 40 other countries around the world and is working now. Is it perfect? Is it right now where it needs to be? Absolutely not. But this plan that is in place right now across Canada is the first real carbon reduction plan in the country's history. We have never had a plan like this before because we've never had a government that was committed to doing it before, and we've never had the popular will for it to happen before. We now have those conditions in place. We need to keep this plan in place and keep making it better.
Chris, you've already gone on this question, is that right? I have a short memory. Thank you. So that concludes the first half of tonight's meeting. It's now time for the audience to participate, and we do have a number of questions that have been provided. I have drawn some randomly and looked at them to be sure that I can read them and that they're relevant, and I will get to them. As a moderator, I can decide, I guess, if a question is to a particular person, they could have 2 minutes and only that person, or if it's more broadly applicable, which I think would be the case in almost every instance, everyone will have 1 minute. So in this case, I'm going to ask this of each candidate, and I'm going to start with Danielle. What specific actions do you have in mind to further reconciliation with Indigenous people in our riding?
So within our riding, we do have 2 reservations. So there's a couple things that need to be done. First and foremost, we need to follow the recommendations from United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. I think the other thing that we need to do is we need to follow the recommendations of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous and Girls report, as well as, in particular, Jordan's principle, which allows for a child first and needs based principle. But I think essentially what we need to do is we need to have an Indigenous-led reconciliation movement within our community. There have been many things done. I know there's the Reconciliation Garden, and there are many movements, and I believe that we
Thank you, Dan. Sorry, we're into 1 minute now, and I know that's not a lot of time.
Okay, the first step is to abolish the Indian Act. It's nothing more than slavery just dressed up in modern day language, especially the section on schools, which I believe, if my memory serves correctly, is section 118, subsection 2, which reads that the minister may, in accordance with this act, create, operate, and maintain schools for Indian children. So that's little more than a backdoor for the residential schools to come flying out again. So that act has to go. And we should also seriously start abolishing, or have serious discussions rather, on abolishing the cabinet positions in the government that are related to Indigenous affairs. Instead, that portfolio should be manned or staffed by a representation of the First Nations bands themselves. We don't need to create bureaucracy to promote more slavery. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
So I think it's important to note, I believe it was the Conservative government that brought forward the Truth and Reconciliation process in the first place. What our government's going to be focused, what I'd be focused on is actually sitting down and talking to the leadership of our local First Nation communities and coming up with policies that are real and measurable to move things forward. 100% the party and myself were behind the national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And in fact, we need to continue to leverage that moving forward. But bottom line is we need to show leadership on this, and that's something I'm willing to do because the status quo isn't acceptable. Thank you.
The policy platform on Indigenous Canadians is the latest thing that was added to the People's Party of Canada. Visit the website and check it out, peoplespartyofcanada.ca. Step number one is to, I agree with Dan here, is to repeal the Indian Act. It has to go, and what we need to do now, and we're the only party that I know of that actually has this as part of their platform, we have to forge a brand new relationship with Canada's First Nations people, where they are equals at the table. That is a monumental job. It's going to be huge. We know it is going to be big, and we know it's going to take a reasonable amount of time. But it has to be done sooner or later, and we're willing to do it because there's no point in trying to fix something that is broken, and there's nothing really salvageable from it. So that's what we're willing to do, is repeal the Indian Act and start over with partners as equals. It has to be done. Thank you.
The question was specifically about this riding, and in this riding, people at Cape Croker can't drink their tap water. There's a boiled water advisory still in effect at Cape Croker, and that needs to end. There's a plan underway to replace the treatment center, but it's not considered to be at the top of the list because there are other water treatment centers in Indigenous communities around the country that are worse off than the one at Cape Croker. But that's not a good enough answer for people who can't drink their own tap water. So we need to fix that plant and expedite that process. Secondly, more houses need to be built on the reserves. I was at Cape Croker a few weeks ago working on a Habitat for Humanity build, and it's great. It's funded by the federal government. More work needs to be done in this regard. And third, I would say the Indigenous peoples of this area need to be brought in as full partners in the discussion of what to do about the harbor.
I think we're all in agreement up here that there needs to be a new direction with how this is dealt with. Our commitment is to provide the Indigenous with safe housing, clean drinking water, access to health care. We got to close the educational funding gap, and we need to end the underfunding of the Indigenous children's services and education. But we need to really take a hardcore look at this. I agree with Bill and Michael. We do need to make the Indigenous equal partners at the table in every facet of our plans, but especially climate change. If we are going to be serious about it, the Indigenous people can provide us with so much sage advice to help us with this process that they are going to be crucial to our future. So making them equal partners is very important. Thank you.
Thank you all. This is a question I can read from the audience. In light of recent ethical challenges or issues, would you advocate more ethics training for politicians, and would you advocate more severe penalties for breaking the ethics regulations? If so, what kind of penalty would you recommend? And I'm going to start with you, Dan.
Well, I'm not sure if you can teach someone to be honest or ethical or not. You're either born with it or you aren't. So the solution really is recall legislation. You institute recall legislation, and then the electorate can fire a dishonest, corrupt, or otherwise unethical politician. It's as simple as that. Get the bums out. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm 100% behind more training because it's obvious there's a lot of the MPs and likely across different parties that could use it. It's something in the military which we take pride in. That ethical training is something we do on an annual basis. It's not, we introduce it at every level of advancement in our professional development because it's something that you always, as much as I agree with Dan, you should just have it innately, but you need to discuss it and consider it all the time. So I'm all for more training. As for more severe punishments, I don't know about the recall legislation, but I actually do think it's not a terrible idea because I've been in those countries where when the political leadership of your country starts thinking that the rule of law doesn't apply to them, then that's the slippery slope down to corruption and all sorts of terrible, terrible consequences. And it's something, we've just seen happen in our country in the last few months. Thanks.
Well, we certainly seem to have a culture now that dictates to people, it's not what you do, it's what you get caught doing. That has to end. And I agree, you can't teach ethics. But let's take the example of a banker, an insurance salesman, a financial planner. If they do something that violates the ethical standards of their organization, if it's serious enough, they're out. That should apply to anybody who is serving in Her Majesty's government, period.
On this one, I'm going to agree with Alex for once. Absolutely, ethics training for politicians. I think the more that politicians and everyone in our society is reminded of the necessity of behaving ethically in all aspects of life, including professional, the better. And I think that should start in the schools with civics training, with inculcating in kids from an early age what is right and what is wrong. And I'm not saying that needs to be a religious training. It needs to apply across the board in the public schools so that when a child graduates from high school, they'll have a very clear idea as they get into their working world of where the boundary lines are.
All right. Coming from a union background, we very much believe in training. We offer all kinds of educational opportunities to our members so that they can train on so many different things, mental health, contracts, all that stuff. We do a lot of training, and I'm a big believer in training. But when you come to this kind of a thing, it starts at home, number one. Teaching ethics has to start from birth. It's not something that can be taught really later in life. And number two, yes, there should be stiffer penalties because we got to hold those people, hold people accountable. Accountability is huge. And I'm reminded of the quote. It's when you're talking about leadership. It's not what leaders do when you're looking. It's what they do when you're not looking.
So as a municipal councillor, we received a lot of training, and it was absolutely invaluable. And I believe that there should be penalties when politicians step out of line. But here's the thing. As voters, you can all penalize somebody when they do something unethical. You can all penalize somebody when they don't keep their promise. You can do that by voting for somebody else.
Thank you. The next question, and I guess we're starting with Alex, is that right? It's a little bit long, but it's local, and I can read it, if you can hear me. Over 4,800 community members have said they do not want the TransCanada Energy hydroelectric storage plant on South Georgian Bay for various reasons. There are many environmental reports on these plants, and the fish kill and environmental impact is reasonably well documented. Saying you don't know enough about it at this point in time is not serving your constituents who do not want to hear it, who do not want it here. Do you stand with these constituents who have serious concerns about the proposal?
So it's like anything. I'm a firm believer of not overreacting. It's something that's been taught to me, and I've learned it the hard way on all sorts of operations around the globe. And the challenge we have here is there is not enough information. I know there's historical projects of similar nature that have had terrible environmental consequences, but at the same time, that isn't where we're at right now. The company, from my understanding, is just doing their initial assessment. Is this even a feasible project? And getting all the stakeholder engagement. So they're actually just going through that engagement process with the local municipalities, the local homeowners, and then they have about a year process to do a proper environmental assessment. And if the project shows that it's not going to work, I'm against it.
All right, just on a point of information, the company involved has met with every one of the candidates here to the best of my knowledge and presented their side of this situation to them. They met with me anyway. And I, with an open mind, listened to what they had to say. And there are some very beneficial aspects to the proposal in terms of being able to take renewable energy sources like wind and solar that fluctuate greatly in terms of their ability to supply electricity and make that electricity available over a longer period of time. That's the good side. What I haven't done is had the opportunity to speak to the people affected by this, the landowners, as well as the indigenous peoples, to find out what their side is. That has to be heard before I could make a determination on that. But at the end of the day, I'm elected by citizens, not by companies.
I actually haven't met with them. I don't know about anybody else. But I would be happy to at some point in the interest of getting all the information necessary to make a decision. At this point, this is, as Alex said, just a project proposal. It would need to go through multiple tests and consultations, including environmental. If it is found to be harmful either to the people or the environment or the lake bed of our community, I would be against it.
Chris?
Once again, there's a lot of agreement amongst the candidates here. I have not had the opportunity to meet with the company either, but a member of my team and I have been researching this and communicating a little bit back and forth about it. And I'll agree with Alex and Michael that there just hasn't been enough research done yet. It's in the preliminary stages, but I'm also in agreement. If it's harmful to the people, if it's harmful to the environment, then there's no way we can let it go forward.
Danielle?
So I have met with with the company twice now. I've had several emails back and forth, as well as spoken with several residents who are quite concerned. And so what needs to happen for me is I need to have the math work for me. So right now, what we are doing, they're proposing is we're going to pump power up when we're not using greenhouse gases, and we're going to put it down later. So it seems like a little bit of a net zero. That said, we do need to extend our hands for innovations, but not at the cost of our lake and the fish that are in it. I am concerned about what has happened in Michigan, and I will continue to look into it until I have a clear stance on this issue.
Dan?
Well, I'll listen to anybody's concerns. I mean, that's my job. But when it comes to this here, it would seem that with real private property rights, these 4,800 individuals wouldn't have any problem at all. If they owned their property fully, and the company that's doing this work was required to compensate them at fair market value for any property damage as a result of their project, I can see no scenario in which that wouldn't be beneficial to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is very simple, but I think is much more meaningful than the way it's phrased, and it's something that I think is quite relevant to this election. The question is, do you agree with negative campaigning? That was the question. And basically, if not, what are you going to do about it? I'm adding that. Sorry, and we're starting with Bill. Did I get that right?
So the question is, before you start the timer, do I agree with negative campaigning?
Yes. It's a simple question.
Yeah, it's a very simple question. No, I don't support negative campaigning. It's one thing to take a specific issue. You know, the People's Party of Canada has a position on climate change and the amount of information that is being presented to people truthfully through mainstream media that's a little bit different than everybody else, and I will argue that. But one of the things that is not useful is to attack individual people and criticize them for something, especially when we look at what happened with the Prime Minister recently. It was wonderful fodder in the news media to criticize and make fun and mock him, but at the end of the day, it serves no purpose because they're talking about something that happened 21 years ago, and we could argue till we're blue in the face about the morality of it, but it serves no purpose. We need to move forward with good ideas, and I'd rather focus on those. Thanks.
Well, on this one, I'm going to agree with my neighbor to the right here. No, obviously, I don't agree with negative campaigning. I think it's a blight on our politics, and I hear about this all the time at the door. It's often the first thing that people say. Why do they just keep, insulting each other and lobbing mud at each other? Why don't they just talk about what's important to us? And I'm actually really quite proud of all of us in this local campaign that we haven't done that. And this is our fourth debate now. You know what? Good for us.
I'm going to agree with Michael on this one. Because you know what? We had an excellent report, like a newspaper article written about us after the Markdale all candidates. And I am proud to say that us here are setting a bar for everybody else in the country as far as treating each other with respect. So I view us as bar setters in that, and I'm very proud of it, and I'm proud of everybody up here, and I'm proud to be a part of this group.
Yeah, I am. I feel exactly the same way. I've actually received phone calls from other candidates letting me know of faux pas that have happened with signs. That would be Mr. Alex Ruff down here, and I would just like to thank each and every one of these gentlemen for being just that, gentlemen.
Dan?
Well, I guess I'm going to risk my libertarian membership by saying I agree with all my opponents. But it's true. There's no place for negative tactics. There's no place for ad hominem personal insults. When people devolve to that level, it just means, hey, I have no ideas of my own. I'm going to trash you now. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not going to ruin it here. We're 100% in agreement here that the negativity doesn't work. It's fine to attack each other's policies and the holes that we see in them. I actually think unethical behavior is a fair target as well. But here we're lucky because we do have all of us that are running a clean campaign. And the question part, what would I do about it? Well, the first thing I said, and this is one of the reasons I'm running to be your MP, is because I'm sick and tired of seeing question period and the way things are being done in Ottawa. So I'm a big believer. You want to change something, you got to do something about it and step forward and show some leadership, and that's what I want to do. And I've even pushed back within my own party. They've asked me to share some negative attacks, and I refuse to do it. And Chris, bar, you said we're going to the bar after. Did I hear you right? You're buying? You're buying? You're buying?
So those were great answers, and I think that you all should be proud of the fact that there has not been that negative kind of attacks in this riding. But if anyone, I don't know how many of you are on Twitter, but if you were, you would see them all the time. And I really hope that you take the message to your colleagues in Ottawa when you are elected. I've got a couple of questions that relate to fiscal balance and balanced budgets. If your party is privileged to form the next government, do you see a return to a balanced budget? And if so, briefly, how? And I'll just add one that's in the same space. What has the parliamentary budget officer said about the cost of your platform that you agree with? And I guess I'm starting with, is it? Michael, sorry. I'd have a short memory, as I said.
We released, the Liberal Party released a fully costed platform just yesterday, I believe, and it's now out there and being examined critically by independent sources. And I have always been a fiscal conservative. Any of you who may have happened to have read any of my articles in the Sun-Times or the National Post going back many years, if you remember any of them, that is, and they didn't just line the birdcage immediately after you picked up your paper, you would know that I'm a fiscal conservative. And, there's been much said about the debt and the deficit. And the key point I would say is that in the 90s, our debt to GDP ratio was out of control, and we were not a good credit risk. It was like 67, 68% and climbing. Now it's dropping, and it's close to 30%, which is the healthiest it's been in 50 years. We have a AAA credit rating. Our credit rating is rock solid. We're the best in the G7, and only Germany among our
Chris?
Everybody's concerned about fiscal responsibility. You don't want a government that's promising to go in there and spend money. And I've heard that time and time again. We don't want to spend a lot of money. Well, what we're proposing is tax fairness and increasing the tax on the wealthiest, and that will help us balance budgets and pay for the services that we want to provide. There's no reason why the 1% can't pay their fair share and help us pay for services and settle up debt. So that's basically what we want to look at, is making taxes more fair, raising the revenues that we need to be more fiscally responsible and provide services for people that they vitally need. Thank you.
So the Green Party of Canada was the first to present their platform to the Parliamentary Budget Office. And I'm very proud of my party's platform. It's transparent and it's responsible. And one of the things that we're going to do to ensure that we're able to pay for all of the things that we're talking about is we're going to remove the fossil fuel subsidies that are happening today. we are going to, we're also going to undertake some tax reform. We're going to increase the taxes on large corporations, and we are also going to have a wealth tax. But we cannot continue to go on the path that we're on right now and continue to give money to fossil fuel industry.
Well, in regards to our platform being vetted by the PBO, we're only running 38 candidates, so I don't think the PBO gives us the time of day. But our platform is fully costed because it doesn't cost anything. We're abolishing all mandatory taxation, regulation, and government interference in foreign aid and in all subsidies of any kind. So a budget can be nothing but balanced if it's reduced to its bare essentials. And that's it.
Alex? Yeah, so obviously the Conservative Party is fully committed to getting back to balanced budgets, and we've Andrew Scheer's announced that that's the goal of that is 5 years, and that's what we're committed to. We're not running and spending another $94 billion of debt over the next 4 years. We're actually going to balance the budget and reduce it. How are we going to do it? Get rid of corporate welfare subsidies to the tune of $1.5 billion to start, just in the first year alone. We're going to reduce the amount of foreign aid funding to focus on those countries that truly need it. All our platform, as the announcements have been being made, are being fully costed by PBO and provided to them. And really the principle is we need a government that will do the things they must do, not the nice to haves. Thank you.
Some of the things that the Conservatives are talking about doing now were things that Maxime Bernier wanted to bring to the table when he was running for leadership of the party. And that includes eliminating all corporate welfare, just to cancel it all together, and it's not coming back. We need to stop handing money over to the UN to try and allegedly deal with climate change in third world countries that in many cases do not have elected governments. You don't know what happens to that money once it leaves and it goes over there. If we can stop wasting money on these things, we will be able to actually balance the budget, because we can't just keep promising to cut taxes and increase spending at the same time. Money doesn't work that way.
Thank you. So here's a fun question. Will your party bring in proportional representation or weighted ballots? Why or why not? And we'll start with, I guess it's Chris, is that right?
I know I have this. I'm not going to look it up because I know the answer to this question. Yes, they want to bring in proportional representation. We think that we need to end the first past the post. Every Canadian wants a fair government, and they want to elect a fair government, and they want to make sure that the government they elect has the power they need. So, of course, we're for it. It's something that Jagmeet has committed himself to. It's something that we are going to commit ourselves to, and that's to better represent you, the people.
Danielle?
So absolutely. The Green Party of Canada is absolutely for proportional representation. So unlike in 2015, when the Liberals made a promise that the 2015 election would be the last first past the post election, that is not what has happened at all. Right now, as it stands with first past the post, one party can have 100% of the power with less than 50% of the votes. That is not fair, and the Liberals absolutely should have kept their promise, and this should not be a first past the post election.
Well, I'm tired of seeing majority governments formed by 30% of the vote, but we find ourselves now in an interesting position with many different options: weighted ballot, fast runoff, PR, mixed member. I'd be willing to explore all of those options on a referendum and let you, the people, decide what you want for yourselves. Thank you.
Alex?
So I'm going to start off saying I'm not a fan, and here's why. When I've looked at proportional representation, I actually think us in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound will be at a huge disadvantage if we move to it, because we don't have the same population base that the rest of the country has. I've seen it in action in a place like Iraq. I just came out of Iraq where they have roughly the same number of seats in their parliament. They had 50-some different parties running that form their legislation. The party with the most seats had 54 seats. It took them a year. They couldn't even form a government and fill all their ministerial positions because they couldn't agree. That being said, I'm not against changes. I'm not against improvement, but I agree it should be done through a referendum. However, that's failed, or the people have decided in this country, I think 6 times, just most recently in PEI in British Columbia, that the people don't want it.
All right, taking a look at some kind of proportional representation or multiple runoff is a great idea because we need to find a way to make the government more representative of the electorate in the country. However, to answer the actual question, the People's Party of Canada sees other things, especially fiscal things, as being much higher priorities at this point in time. So we understand that it's a concern to people, but we have at this point no plans to consider reforming the electoral system because there's other things that are more important for now.
Michael?
To Danielle's point, she's right. The Liberal Party should never have made that promise to change the system wholesale without knowing what we were going to go to. This is a very difficult thing to do. It takes, in many cases, 10 years to do it. It takes a massive, expensive political will. And the reality, as I saw from inside the government in the Prime Minister's office in 2017 and 18, is that when Donald Trump came along and threatened to tear up the NAFTA, that began consuming all of the oxygen, or most of the oxygen within the government. It was an existential threat to the country's economy. And it was, in my view, impossible to do anything as ambitious as a wholesale electoral reform under those circumstances. I would consider it in the future, however, and I like the ranked ballot.
Thank you very much. The next question is quite general. I think it may come from 3 young people named Hannah, Evie, and Daphne. And the question simply is, looking to the future, how are you going to help make our future better? So it's a very general question, but I'll be interested in your answers. And I guess, Danielle, are we starting with you? Thank you.
How am I going to make our future better? Well, I'm a mom of 3. My kids are 14, 12, and 6. And quite frankly, I think that by sitting up here and fighting for something that I truly, truly believe, I honestly believe that climate change is the problem of the world. It's the problem that the world is facing right now. And if at the end of the day, when I walk away from all of this, I hope that what my kids see is a strong woman who's gotten up here against many, many odds and have talked to people about climate change and hopefully have affected change.
Dan?
Well, the best way to improve the quality of life for young people is to stop taking their money. Abolish all mandatory forms of taxation, eliminate all subsidies, and let you decide for yourself where your money should be going. And if we were to reclassify the Canadian dollar onto gold again instead of this garbage paper that comes spewing out of the central banks, our dollar wouldn't have lost 98% of its purchasing power over the last century. Thank you.
Alex?
So I guess to stay in the generic portion of the question is I'm going to set the example, and that's by coming forward, and I think you give credit to all of us up here for it's not easy to throw your name into public office, and it's a lot of work. And there's critics everywhere. But I think I've always held myself. I've been fortunate enough to serve this country for so long and to be held to a higher standard than everybody else. And I accept that. That's part of what it means when you take public office. And what I've promised to everyone, I think, to help to make things better for the future, my job, if elected, is to listen to you, every single one of you. I don't have to agree with you. I need to explain to you why I disagree, but my job is to listen to you. And finally, to make it better, I'm just going to work my butt off for you.
All right, first of all, I just want to ask a quick question to everybody in the room, and specifically to the three young people who formed the question. How many people here believe that Canada is the best country in the world? Let's hear it. Come on. Yeah, be proud. So my job is to make sure that nothing adverse happens to that. My job is to protect it and so that it stays this way for your future. Can it be better? Yeah, sure it can get better, but it's already the best. So as long as we keep it the best, mission accomplished. That's my job.
You know, all of us up here on the stage are working to create a better future for the country and for our young people. And we do that by modeling good behavior, by being decent, honest, honorable people. That is the first thing that we need to do, and that I would do, and that I do, and I will continue to do, whether I'm elected or not. But on the issues, to me, it comes down to three things: dealing with climate change, battling climate change in a serious way, making sure that our economy and our jobs and our workers are protected, and third, not giving in to the neo-nationalism and tribalism and racism that are sweeping the world right now in various ways in various places, and sticking to the Canadian values that have made this country as great as it is, which is getting along with people from all walks of life, all religions, all backgrounds, and making sure that we live in peace together.
As a hockey coach, I deal with kids all the time. And the biggest thing when dealing with them is to listen to them. And they want people that are going to set the example. Like we are setting the example for civility. And I hold myself to that standard as a hockey coach. I make sure my kids see me set an example that's positive. They don't see me arguing with referees. They don't see me acting like a lunatic. So what we need to do is battle the climate crisis for them. We need to set examples of civility and ethics, and we need to listen to them. If I'm elected, my door is open to everybody, kids, adults, seniors, everybody. And I would like to be one of the, when I was a kid, we always got letters from the MP when we graduated. I would love to visit every school and try to inspire them, because I'm up here because I'm inspired to do better things, and I'm hoping that they'll be inspired to do better things. And Greta Thunberg is a leading example of that. Thank you.
Thank you all. This is a more local question. It touches on some of what we've already discussed. What plans do you have for a more environmentally sustainable community in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound? What local initiatives would you take to make this area and take advantage of, I guess, sustainable, environmentally sustainable behavior? And I guess we're back to Dan, is that right?
Well, environmental sustainability all comes down to strengthening private property rights. The right to own your property fully and not have it vested through the Crown. If you own your land in its entirety, then you and only you have control over any resource that land produces. So if a private company wants to acquire your land, they must pay the fair market value. They must do environmental assessments, because we will amend the Constitution and the Charter of Rights to ensure that every Canadian has the right to a healthy, clean, and safe environment, and that they will be allowed to take legal action against anyone that infringes upon that basic right. So by strengthening these private property rights, that's really the key to environmental sustainability, allowing farmers to innovate, upgrade their technology without any burdensome regulation or government red tape. Thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, so I answered part of this earlier, but the first step we need to do locally is not be in one of the areas in the country that have big emitters by any stretch of the imagination, is to work on the little things that we can do, and that's primarily on the recycling, the pollution, and taking care of our local area. And that can be done through a number of ways, right? Support our local conservation groups. I'm a proud member of a number of them locally. Continue to encourage things like I think they're called waste watchers in the local area that are picking up the cigarette butts and doing things like that. As well, though, our party policy is all about innovation. If we increase small business, create the structure for them to continue to grow with the right taxation, we can be leaders in this area to actually help change and take the climate fight global. Thanks.
Because natural resources is primarily a provincial concern, it's difficult to actually make specific promises about making sure things are sustainable. But what I can do is I can work with provincial and municipal partners. So let's say, for example, what we want to do is we want to ensure clean rivers, clean lakes, clean air, and we want to have buildings that are more energy efficient, not because it's being dictated to us by the United Nations or something else, but because it just simply makes sense. We can sit down and take a look at local building codes. We can innovate locally. I watched the movie Resilience that was made locally, and there was some brilliant local ideas in there from people that are very creative. And we can work at a local level and achieve these goals because that's what we want to do. And I'd look at approaching it from that perspective.
What we don't need is cuts to our Conservation Authority budgets, which the Ford government is doing right now. What we do need is changing in our zoning at the county level, which they're already working on, to allow smaller homes, including tiny homes on smaller lots. We need to introduce a retrofit program, which the federal government is now going to backstop with up to $40,000 interest-free loans. We need to plant trees, lots and lots of trees. The Liberal Party is promising to plant 2 billion trees as part of a massive tree planting program, and that's a great idea. And finally, we need to promote the next generation of nuclear power, small modular reactors. We are experts in this. We can be leaders in this technology.
We've just heard a lot of excellent ideas, but there's something that has been not mentioned, and that is that Owen Sound has one of the best climate action groups that I've ever seen. So whoever wins needs to invite them in and make them a part of the discussion because they're doing a lot of the work, a lot of the research. So let's hook our little red wagon to them and let's help them with what they need, and let's listen to them because they're doing a lot of the work already and we're committing to doing that work, but they know the local people and what you need here. Plus, you guys are blessed with a store in Owen Sound that I hope gets a national franchise in Naked Basics. I've started using it myself on the regular, and let me tell you, it's a blessing to your community, and I hope they get a store in every community, especially Chesley, so I don't have to drive 45 minutes to refill my stuff. Thank you.
So what we need is leadership to encourage action. So as a Grey Highlands councillor, I was very fortunate, along with other people, and we were able to declare a climate emergency within a Grey Highlands. The other thing that came out of that policy was an action group. And it was very, very important to that council, which I was part of, to create a group that wasn't a committee, that wasn't a group that was going to get together and just chat about things, but it was an action group. So when you put things in the hand of the community, what you're doing is you're creating incubators for action. And some of the things that we've seen in Grey Highlands, they might seem small, but it's absolutely amazing what has happened since we declared a climate emergency. Within our actual municipal office, we are getting rid of almost all of the plastic. We are using less paper. So small things, but things that were initiated simply because of that.
Thank you all. So we now have come to the end of the question period. I don't know about you, but I've been enthralled. I think that all 6 candidates have been wonderful in terms of their answers and the way they've worked together. You know, I've been around politics my whole life, and it's one of the best experiences tonight in terms of listening to the thoughtful candidates. So you've clapped once already. That's enough. We're now to the final stage of each person having a minute for wind-up comments, and we're going to start as prearranged with Danielle as the first person to give a final statement.
In my introductory remarks, I asked you to remember that we must repair the soil, the air, and the water, that we must ensure a just transition for everyone, and that we must act now. And we must keep acting consistently, collectively, and relentlessly until we have achieved our goals. And then keep acting beyond that to ensure we don't ever end up in this mess again. We have no more time. We must move forward. We owe our children and grandchildren the same promise and possibility that we ourselves have enjoyed. The politicians of the past have put that possibility at risk by their inaction. I ask you, should we now vote for the same parties whose inaction has brought us to that point? On October 21, stand up together and vote for me. Vote green. Vote Danielle Valiquette.
Thank you, Danielle. Now I'll ask Chris to speak.
I would like to thank the moderator, my colleagues, and you, the audience, for participating in this meeting this evening and contributing to our democracy in Canada. Not only if every national leader could participate in every debate, we'd have a much better democratic perspective, allowing Canadians to scrutinize both policies and candidates as we have here tonight. At this table tonight, we have many different ideas, as you have heard, and many different ways that we would go about implementing these policies. I ask each and every one of you tonight to encourage your friends, your neighbors, your family to get out and vote for the candidate of their choice. Do it forthrightly. The democratic process is incredibly important in Canada, and I encourage you to honor this freedom. We may not be the Baskin-Robbins ice cream up here, but we certainly do offer a lot of flavors from different platforms. I ask you to consider supporting the NDP.
Thank you. I shouldn't do that, but I should say the ice cream up here is Chapman's. Michael Van Tent of the Liberal Party.
Thank you to the Chamber and to everyone here, including all the candidates, for coming out tonight. I'd like you to go home with these key facts in mind. The Liberal government signed the 3 biggest trade deals in our country's history. Unemployment right now is at a 40-year low. We lowered the small business tax rate to 9% from 11%. It's now the lowest in the G7. We made historic improvements to the Canada Pension Plan. We established the Canada Child Benefit, which helps more than 17,000 kids here in our community. And we introduced the first real climate plan in our history. We need to keep moving forward. With an income tax cut to 0 on the first 15,000 of income, national pharmacare, improved old age security, a housing plan that gets more people into their first home, and a target of 0 greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 with a real plan to get there. It's time for a much more active, more progressive approach. We need a louder voice in Ottawa. On October 21st, vote Michael Denton. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, once again, thank you everybody for participating in this process. It is fundamentally important. Keep this in mind. If nothing changes, you can't expect change. And I want to congratulate the current government on providing all of those jobs. There's enough that each of you could have 3 part-time ones if you like. Please take the time to look a little deeper into the issues. I've left some information outside. I'm happy to share it with you. We are the new kid on the block, the newest party in Canada. I want you to consider deeply what each party is bringing to the table. I want to thank you for participating in the process and get you to encourage other people to vote on October 21st. I'm Bill Townsend, and the People's Party of Canada will represent people with freedom, responsibility, fairness, and respect, and we will put you first. Thank you.
So, Alex Ruff.
So first off, thank you again for everybody coming out tonight and for the organizers and to the fellow candidates and Danielle too. I think, there's no, well, fellow, I used the word fellow, so I didn't want to. So no one party has the monopoly on good ideas, and I picked up a few that I'm going to walk away from with tonight. So the key thing is the Conservative Party is all about, focused on living within our means and making life more affordable for you. I talked earlier, my priorities here in this riding are seniors, farmers, small business, responsible fiscal management, balanced budgets, not adding another $94 billion of debt in the next 4 years, and standing up for our military and our veterans, something that's obviously dear to my heart. I think I believe I have the experience and the leadership to work positively and collaboratively with all levels of government and in Ottawa, and to listen to you and be your strong voice in Ottawa. On October 21st, please vote Alex Ruff.
And Dan Little.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. And it's time for us all to wake up. Wake up and smell the deficit. By now it's a bloating corpse. Wake up and realize that taxation is theft, fraud, and armed extortion. And central banking is little more than legalized counterfeiting. On October 21st, just get out and vote. I don't care who you vote for. Just do it. Thank you.
I know that applause is for all the candidates. Is that right? So this concludes the all candidates meeting. The the Owen Sound District Chamber of Commerce, thank you to each of the candidates. We thank you for your participation and for the excellent evening and for discussing issues that will be so important for us to decide on October 21st. Thank you, everyone in the audience, those who came out tonight, even those who may be Maple Leaf fans and would have watched the first game of the hockey game. You came here, great. And thank you for those who watched on Rogers. It will be rebroadcast on Rogers TV several times. The concluding statement, a very high price in our national history has paid for the privileges we enjoy as Canadians in 2019. Please be sure to cast your ballot. Good night. Thank you.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
All I wanted was to see a movie. One down, please.
I can't sell downstairs tickets to you people.
How dare they? I could afford to buy the more expensive ticket. I run my own business. But they refused to take my money. They left me there all night. On what charge? They said I didn't pay the theater tax. But it was really about color.
Sister Desmond, appeal this conviction and your community will stand behind you.
Do you have any idea what this will do to us?